little dog. Two.
Hello, I'm Monsignor Charles Meinhof.
I'm Pat Shelton, and welcome to Real.
Lent has begun, and last week Father Tom Legere, leading us in the Stations of the Cross, said what we need are men and women who stand for something. That means sacrifice.
And this is the season that Christians traditionally sacrifice something for 40 days. Now, if you haven't gotten your Lenten sacrifices underway, we have a special feature today that may prepare you, get you in the mood.
What really gets us in the mood, Pat, I think more than anything else, is we have to surround ourselves, as Father said, with very special people, people who really mean something to us.
Yes, and each week on Real to Real, we meet some wonderful people through our features, and coming up next are some very extra special people, very reverent and very brave.
It's an old-fashioned neighborhood, a place where everyday Americans raise their families. The modest house is home for all the usual trappings of a childhood guaranteed to fill a treasure chest of memories. For 8-year-old Laurel Ernessy, the nearest tree is a chance to demonstrate the finer points of climbing for her younger sister, Crystal. But Laurel's childhood will also store a memory of pain.
It involves a lot of needles in your veins. And when they tried to get the IV in me for the hospital, it took them 5 times, and they popped five of my veins in my wrist, and they had to go to the next one. They popped 3 in this one. Took a long time to heal, too.
Within the last year, Laurel was diagnosed as having leukemia, a disease that at worst steals our young, and at best creates a nightmare of fear and uncertainty, a nightmare that is shared by her parents, Dave and Karen.
You just feel like your heart is going to break inside of you. It's a fearful feeling, you know. Like I said, even though we knew the Lord was in control, it's still frightening to think, well, maybe, man, he might take her.
You learn to live day by day, because there's awful days and there's good days. And you just have to take it one day at a time, and just every day is a gift. It's a gift from God. And you have to treat it that way.
Laurel and her folks have been supported through their bad times by family and friends, and through some good times by new friends, like Mike Bradley and Holly Bondis, volunteers in the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
The families invite you in, and to share a wish. The wish is really secondary. It's the point of being with the child, and you learn about love, you learn about friendship, and you learn about God in its purest sense. It's unadulterated with what happens to people in life. And it's so pure and so beautiful. And when you get that and you get it from each child, they're the strength. We're just a means to try to do something to keep the family unit happy for a moment. But it's selfish, because we get it out of every wish, out of every family. That's why I'm here and why I plan on staying with it.
And the friendships you make, I mean, you may spend, 2 or 3 days with the family, but you're friends for life. That's how we always feel. You've almost brought more members into your family, and it's very humbling too. I think, it makes you realize what life is all about and what's important in life and what's not important.
The Make-A-Wish Foundation has thousands of volunteers and 70 chapters worldwide. But perhaps everything we need to know about this special, spiritual organization can be learned in the story of its beginning.
Make-A-Wish was started in Phoenix, Arizona in 1980 with a little boy who was 7 years old and suffered from leukemia. His wish was to be an Arizona State Trooper. An Arizona trooper named Tommy Austin heard about this little boy whose name was Chris Gracious and arranged for him to become a real state trooper. They got him a badge, a real badge. They got him a helicopter ride, a uniform made to order, complete with a Smokey Bear hat. They gave him a ticket book, which he used to give tickets to pedestrians walking up and down his street. And when they protested, he flashed his badge. Shortly after that day, Chris died. He was buried with the full honors of an Arizona State Trooper, and in fact, his tombstone reads Christopher Gracious, the date he was born, the date he died, and the words Arizona State Trooper. After Chris's funeral, Tommy Austin and Chris's mom got together and were talking about what it had meant to Chris to have that wish fulfilled, and realized there must be many, many more children that were ill that had a wish that without help might never be fulfilled. And so the Make-A-Wish Foundation was formed.
But on this day, the story of Make-A-Wish is the story of Laurel and her wish.
Through all my life, I've been hearing about him on the news and stuff, and I've kind of like grown up with him.
Meeting this special him is about a day of riding in limousines, lunching at a famous restaurant, and wondering all along what he's really like.
He cares about people. He cares about the United States. He's sensitive, and he really, really cares. He just seems like the kind of guy that would be someone's grandfather and they would like him very much. I wish I had him for grandpa.
Well, hello there. Well, thank you very much. Those are beautiful.
Thank you.
I understand that somebody has some questions they want to ask. You do? What are they?
Well, what was the hardest part about being a president?
I think that was in making some telephone calls when you had to report to families that some of their family in military uniform would not be coming home. I think any time that the president has to give orders to our people in uniform, put them in places where their lives may be in danger, that's hard.
Seems like it. What do you do in your spare time now when you're
What
like
do I
not
do in
busy?
my spare time? I have to confess that yes, I have one thing that is very dear to my heart. Up north of here, near Santa Barbara, we have a ranch. And we have horses. And I love riding and have been doing it for most of my life. And every time I get a free moment, as a matter of fact, this Friday, I will be going to the ranch. And if you look up there on the wall, that's a picture of our ranch, and that white horse is the one I ride.
How about you asking me some questions now?
Well, start with what grade are you in?
Third.
Third grade. Have you thought about what maybe you want to be when you grow up?
Well, I want to be a veterinarian.
A veterinarian. Well, by golly, maybe one day I can have you come to take care of my horse.
I'd like that.
Make a wish. Dreams do come true and lead to bigger wishes.
Make-A-Wish. That's a program of real love, Monsignor.
Love is pretty hard to come by, and just wishing doesn't do it, does it?
Oh.
You really have to work at love, and love is really made up of sacrifices, so that the people who understand our sacrifices begin to understand our ability and capability to suffer.
Heavenly Father, enable us to direct our actions by your holy inspiration, to carry on the challenges of sacrifice in our daily lives. Through your gracious assistance, strengthen us to accept the burdens and the challenges, to demonstrate our love for you through the very quality of our love for others. Heavenly Father, through the beautiful example of your Son Jesus, you taught us the meaning of sacrificing. Give us a sacrificial spirit so that we will come to value hard work, extra effort, when it is expended on behalf of another for a noble cause. Help us to appreciate that our suffering on behalf of another is but a sign of our love and our caring, a sign of our love for you, a sign that we truly desire to take up our cross as you have challenged us and follow in your footsteps. Help us, Lord, to willingly accept the opportunities for sacrificing in our own lives. We ask this through the merits of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Each year during Lent, most people, I think, Monsignor, take this opportunity to give up cigarettes or sweets or something like that. But this year, I want to try to take my sacrificing a bit more seriously. I think I want to pray more, go to church more, and I would hope that our viewers would take their sacrifices more seriously too.
Well, I'll join you, Pat, and I'll join all of you too, but before we do our things on our own, let's watch this now as Father Tom Legere continues to lead us into the sacrifice of Jesus as he leads us through the stations of the cross. We know now how important it is to follow Jesus to death and to resurrection. So until then, next week, goodbye and God bless you.
Good night.
The second station, Jesus carries his cross. Lord, you were loaded down with more responsibility than anyone, yet you picked up your cross and carried it without complaining. It hurt and was heavy, of course, but you carried it. We, on the other hand, like to play the martyr. We let everyone know how heavy our crosses are. We whine and complain and indulge in self-pity. How different from the willing and even cheerful giver that Jesus was. Back in the summer of 1976, I was asked to pick up my cross in a special way. I didn't do so cheerfully or generously, like Jesus did. But I eventually learned the lesson that growth is painful. Perhaps in sharing some of my story, you will be able to sort out some of the things that may be unfolding within you during this Lent. I entered that summer of 1976 like any other normal person of the 20th century. I had received a lot of book learning in my life, and I relied heavily on the use of reason. To me, things were either rational or irrational. I rejected anything that was irrational and clung mightily to anything and everything that made sense. During that summer, I was to discover a third possibility, going beyond reason to the level of religious intuition. First, however, my fixation with logic and reason had to be broken down. Those two false gods had to be overthrown. The context for my turning point was 30 days at a retreat house. During my time there, I desperately wanted to have an experience of God. I wanted to change my life and become more of a channel of God. Looking at myself for the first real time in my life caused me to direct anger at myself. This led to a deep depression and great mental anguish. At that point, I had experienced what Morton Kelsey calls the cracking of the husk of the ego. I felt totally broken, unable to cope, and certainly unable to serve. At that time, I called out to Jesus, the higher power. I had done so before. We all do. But this time it was different. This time I was not trying to manipulate God. This time I was willing to submit humbly and gratefully and give myself over to the will of God. I was no longer stuck on the level of reason. But I did not have to regress to the level of irrationality either. I discovered a third option. This step entailed going beyond reason and stepping into mystery. Once a person makes such a decisive step, there is no turning back. The only way out is through. One opts to take the road less traveled and see it through to the end. This step does not solve all of a person's problems, eliminate all of one's neuroses, or overcome all of one's sins. A person is aware that he or she will always be a wounded healer. Nevertheless, something very real has happened. A person has reached a decisive turning point, and from that point on, nothing is ever quite the same again. People arrive at this dependence on the higher power in many ways. It may be as a result of the death of a loved one, or a broken marriage, or a serious illness, or the experience of one's personal sinfulness, or a million other things. The important thing is that we take advantage of that one big chance, that turning point, when it eventually comes our way. The cross that comes is not a mistake or a coincidence. It is our cross. Let's pray that, like Jesus, we can pick up our cross. It's the only authentic way to salvation. The third station, Jesus falls the first time. There were limits to Jesus' strength because besides being the Lord, he was also completely human. And so he fell because the cross was too heavy for him. Jesus, like us, felt the limitations of being human. We cannot function with insufficient sleep or poor nutrition or too much stress and responsibility in our lives. And so, being human, we fall. The important thing, however, is to get back up again. None of us are perfect and without flaw. We are not superhumans. We are not gods. It's okay to be imperfect. God can still work with us. In fact, the real sickness is when we, in our pride, fall victim to the sin of perfectionism. Perfectionism is a sin, and it is also an illusion. How blessed we are when we discover our brokenness. Unless we discover our brokenness, we will never discover our inner beauty. It all begins with a sin of pride, by which we refuse to submit ourselves to God. We insist instead on being in total control of our lives. We set ourselves up as the sole judge of all that is. Briefly, it is the Garden of Eden all over again. Some individuals can perpetrate this deception almost indefinitely. They escape into the world of self-centered distractions and steadfastly deny their own sinfulness. Instead, they project their guilt onto others. The only trouble with this approach is that you can't get away with it forever. Some of these individuals have a complete nervous breakdown. Some become alcoholics or dependent on drugs. But most of such folks who are holding out on God eventually just become mean, surly, miserable, moody, and aggressive. And all the while, God is seeking us out and calling us to our true selves, our Christic sonship. If we are even the slightest bit open, God will eventually knock on our doors so loudly that we will have to let him in. If we do, it will be the best move we've ever made. This meeting with a living God is not all peaches and cream. In fact, it can be a soul-searing, painful experience, since we finally see ourselves as God sees us. All of our defenses fall, and our projections are burned away. We are convicted of our own sinfulness and confronted with God's love for us. God's initiative may come suddenly and dramatically, like a dike bursting, or we may be brought to compunction slowly, like a gentle spring rain falling on the grass. The circumstances leading to such a conversion opportunity are varied, but the effects are inevitably the same. When our conversion finally takes place, we weep, always interiorly, often physically too. This gift of tears signifies that the old man, the false self, is dead. We no longer powerize people and project our guilt onto others. We are stripped naked before a living, loving God and see ourselves as we really are. It is this discrepancy between God's goodness and our egotism that is the source of our sorrow. Our tears are not all negative, however. We also shed tears of joy because we have discovered our true nature as children of God. We then understand that we have been reborn as children of the resurrection. We become aware of the divine spark within us, and we are humbled and awed to consider that we have been divinized, called to share in the very life of the Trinity. How important is it that we have this experience? Well, the important thing is that we somehow arrive at a state of brokenness so that the Lord can make us anew. The actual experience of weeping is not important in itself. It is the attitude behind the weeping which is crucial. You say that you and God are getting along just fine, thank you, that you are keeping all of the commandments and the laws of the church, and that you see no need to admit your nothingness before God. Watch out, you may be deluding yourself. St. Bonaventure and St. Teresa are two exceptions to the rule. They seem to have been in deep union with God all of their lives. But the rest of the saints, along with us ordinary Christians certainly, have always had to go through the painful process of conversion. They instinctively recognize the importance of this gift of tears, at least interiorly, since it is a body-soul statement of the simple truth of things. So unless you think you are in the same ballpark with St. Bonaventure and St. Teresa of Lisieux, chances are you need to come to terms with your creatureliness. Has it happened yet? Only you and God know that. But historically, at least one very good indication of true conversion has been the gift of tears. When you fall the first time, welcome to the human race. The good news of the gospel is not that we have to clean up our act and then God is going to love us. That's bad news because none of us ever completely get our act cleaned up. The good news is that we are loved despite our brokenness. What an amazingly graceful revelation. The fourth station, Jesus meets his afflicted mother. Mary hurt a lot when she saw Jesus pass by, but neither could take away the other's pain. Each had to do what they had to do. A similar kind of thing happens when we have to take a different road than our parents or friends. Maybe our parents always wanted us to fulfill their expectations, and we feel called to follow a different path. Maybe a friend and I come to a crossroad and to a parting of the ways. This is always painful, but each human being needs to be true to his or herself. At a time like that, we have to watch out that we don't do what others are expecting of us just so that we can be liked. Young man, you'll never get anywhere in life unless you learn how to compromise. That's what an old seminary professor told me several years ago. And there's not the slightest doubt in my mind that what my old professor told me is true. Compromise is a tried and true political reality. The gears of government would grind to a halt without it, and business would go broke if they were not willing to be practical about certain things. But should the church be willing to compromise with Christian principles? According to my understanding of the New Testament, Jesus was not a very compromising person at all. He could have lived a lot longer and been able to teach us so many more things about his Father if only he would have been more prudent in what he said. With a little change of wording here and there and a slight shift of emphasis in his teaching now and again, he could have very easily accommodated himself to his society. But dreamer that he was, he refused to change his principles or his teaching. And for marching into Jerusalem and boldly confronting the secular and religious leaders of his society with his message, he was put to death. Not too many Christians are being harassed by civil authorities these days. That is probably for one of two reasons. Either the society we live in is so Christianized that it is no longer threatened by what we say, or we have so watered down the message of Jesus that it is no longer discernible from the mainstream of secular thought. I sadly conclude that our acceptability as a Christian people is probably for the latter reason. An example of the spirit of compromise immediately comes to mind. A woman who happens to be a practicing Catholic was telling me that since we live in a Christian country, we must always obey the laws of the land. She was certain there could never arise a conflict between her Christianity and her loyalty to this country. I asked her what she would do if a law was ever passed limiting each couple to one child and requiring a mandatory sterilization of the mother after the birth of that child. I was certain that she could see the inherent conflict in this situation. But she blew my mind by saying that she would submit to the sterilization if so required, if our lawmakers would pass it. Then, according to her, it must surely be okay. She would completely go against the conviction that she had held all her life because she wanted at all costs to be considered a loyal citizen. We Christians have learned to compromise very well. Maybe that is the secret of our success and the reason that Christians are tolerated in almost every country in the world. But what does Jesus think about our practicality and the spirit of compromise? My hunch is that he is very sad at the way we have made so comfortable and sweetly reasonable the way of life that he initiated by shedding real blood on the cross. It is nice to be liked, but it is better to be true to ourselves. Jesus did not worry about being a pleaser, even with his own mother. He thought it was better to be authentic and real, and that's our challenge too.
Tonight, we've only been able to share a portion of Father Legere's inspiring Lenten spiritual journey with you. Transcripts and videotapes of the complete series, The Stations of the Cross, 14 Stepping Stones to God, are available. Please send a check or money order of $2 per complete transcript or $19.95 per videotape to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19103. Don't miss this opportunity for you and your family to join Father Legere as he follows the way of the cross.
I'd like to tell you about a program unique to the Diocese of Trenton. The Maternity and Adoption Services of Catholic Charities has established a medical fund which provides counseling, medical services, food, clothing, and shelter for women facing an unplanned pregnancy. By offering these services, they can support the doctrine of our faith and allow women to make the positive choice of life for their unborn children. But they can't do it without your help. Please call 609-394-5181 and pledge your donation to save a life.
We welcome your comments and suggestions and encourage you to write us at Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia 19103, or call us during regular business hours at 215-668-9842.
Travel arrangements for Reel to Reel by Atkinson and Mullen, Newtown Square, PA, 215-359-5980.
Years ago, leukemia took the lives of enough people to fill a ballpark. But today, thanks to research by the Leukemia Society, more and more people are surviving. The Leukemia Society of America, we're closing in on a killer.
I am one of the many hundreds of men who have been deeply touched by the Men's Prayer Breakfast.
This type of regular monthly gathering is just a very special event.
Our next breakfast is this Saturday, March 17th. As always, we will meet at Williamson's Restaurant, City Line and Belmont Avenue at 9 a.m.
Even if you are new, come on out because we have talks just for you.
Don't miss your chance for the Men's Prayer Breakfast this Saturday, March 17th at 9 a.m.
Just call 215-668-HOPE for information.